great to see everybody this morning. I'm going to first start by thanking our host, the First Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church, for opening up their space for this very serious conversation we're going to have this morning. And one of the pastors who I just got to meet last week is so kind to introduce himself and welcome you to the church and to open us with prayer. So, Pastor Andre.
Yeah, on behalf of the congregation here at First Trinity, as well as our local chapter of Lutherans for Life, I do want to give everyone, especially panelists, a warm welcome here this morning. I am Pastor Eric Andre. I'm the campus pastor here and outreach minister, and I also serve as chaplain for Lutheran Student Fellowship, including at the University of Pittsburgh. If you have any needs during this time regarding the facilities, I'll be in the back if you have questions about anything, quietly, obviously. And if any of you after would like to visit our beautiful sanctuary nave, please be seen. I can give a little mini tour. But yeah, I'd be happy to open us with a brief word of prayer. Let us pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Lord, you are the author of all life, from the unborn to the aged. We ask you to bless our gathering here today, that all our words may be spoken according to your will, and that you may order our days according to your peace. Here, now, on campus, in the city, this community. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. I'm former Congressman Keith Rothman, so I've met a lot of folks in the room, so it's good to see people again, and welcome if you're not from the Pittsburgh area. I want to welcome you today on behalf of Pennsylvania Pro-Life Coalition, the McGee Project, Rehumanize International, People Concerned for the Unborn Child, and the Pennsylvania Family Institute. The topic that our panel is going to discuss today is a painful one. It's an emotional one. For nearly 50 years, many people in this room, many listening on live stream, and millions across the nation have taken to heart two of the core foundational principles of our nation. Namely, our God-given equality and our God-given inalienable right to life. And you have advocated that those principles be affirmed for all human beings, regardless of race, ethnicity, creed, age, or state of dependency. Today's discussion will bring into sharp relief how far some in our country have departed from those principles. Principles with which Abraham Lincoln talked of transcendence. 5 years ago, the United States House of Representatives established a select panel to investigate incredibly disturbing conduct, reflected in statements from Planned Parenthood personnel and individuals in the fetal tissue procurement industry, with respect to the harvesting, collecting, pricing, and distribution of fetal body parts following abortions. Those statements were made in the course of investigative reporting done by one of our panelists this morning, David Daleiden, who is the president and founder of the Center for Medical Progress. We are here today in the Oakland neighborhood of Pittsburgh, not far from the University of Pittsburgh. We are here because Mr. Daleiden has uncovered yet more disturbing, shocking, grotesque, and macabre information about practices involving fetal tissue research and dissection of fetal organs that involves funding from American taxpayers. The seal of the University of Pittsburgh speaks to the ideals of truth and virtue. Veritas et virtus. Mr. Daleiden's and the Center for Medical Progress's work, assisted through the legal action of Judicial Watch to obtain documents, reveals truths that are far from virtuous. With that, I want to introduce you today to Mr. David Daleiden, who is going to open up the panel discussion. Mr. Daleiden is a graduate of Claremont McKenna College in California and as I said, is the founder and president of the Center for Medical Progress. The Center is a group of citizen journalists dedicated to monitoring and reporting on medical ethics and advances. They are concerned about contemporary bioethical issues that impact human dignity, and they oppose any interventions, procedures, and experiments that exploit the unequal legal status of any class of human beings. The Center envisions a world in which medical practice and biotechnology ally with and serve the goods of human nature and do not destroy, disfigure, or work against them. Mr. Daleiden.
I think, is this on now?
No.
Not yet.
It was on.
There we go. Now it's on. Thank you. Thank you, Keith, for that very kind introduction. Thank you to Meredith and to Rehumanize and to everyone who's been part of organizing this today. And it's really wonderful to be here with all of you this morning. And I've been really enjoying for the past 24 hours or so getting introduced to the city of Pittsburgh for the first time. I'm from California. My family does have some northeastern Pennsylvania roots over in Wilkes-Barre. I don't always know the pronunciation, but the Greek Ruthenian branch of the family is from up there. So I've been there before, but never made it out to Western Pennsylvania before. I know that we have a lot of great panelists here today, and so I'm going to try to keep my remarks appropriately tailored to my lane and to the amount of time that I have. Sometimes though, once I do start talking, I have a tendency to go on and on and on. So if that should happen this morning, I just want you all to know that you can always call the White House, and the Vice President's office with Kamala Harris will be happy to send 11 jacketed bed security off the stage. I will also do my best to be articulate this morning. I unfortunately had a little bit of an accident on the way to the airport over the weekend, and I've got a little bit of whiplash in the car, and so if I sound like I have a cold, I actually don't. It's not COVID, don't worry, it's actually because my throat was, the back of my neck was very swollen the past 24 hours or so, but I think we're gonna get through it together. So what I'd like to do to begin my remarks is we could play the video that Center for Medical Progress released highlighting some of the most significant facts that we've been reporting on about fetal experimentation at the University of Pittsburgh over the past half a year or so. So we're going to play that video first, and then I'm going to unpack a little bit more for you about what we've been tracking and reporting and uncovering.
The University of Pittsburgh is a hub for some of the most barbaric experiments carried out on late-term aborted human infants. Experiments funded by the United States government. At the same time, the university sponsors the local Planned Parenthood abortion business in what looks like an illegal quid pro quo for fetal body parts. This photo from an experiment published by Pitt scientists in 2020 shows the scalps of 5-month-old aborted babies grafted onto the backs of lab rats, growing the aborted baby's hair on the rodents. The Pittsburgh scientists describe these aborted babies' scalps as full-thickness human fetal skin, cut from the heads and backs of the babies, then processed via removal of excess fat underneath the baby's skin before stitching it onto the rats. How was this paid for? With a nearly $500,000 research grant from Dr. Anthony Fauci's NIAID office at the NIH. It gets worse. This photo is from a protocol developed by another Pitt scientist for harvesting the freshest, most pristine livers from 5-month-old aborted babies in order to isolate massive numbers of stem cells for experimental transplantation into adults. You can see the premature baby, aborted alive via labor induction, under surgical drapes with the umbilical cord off to one side as the baby is cut open to harvest the liver. The Pitt scientist who invented this experiment received nearly $3 million from the NIH. Third, the GoodMap project is a multi-year $1.4 million grant to the University of Pittsburgh from the NIH. The grant makes Pitt a distribution hub for aborted fetal kidneys and other fetal body parts for NIH-funded projects across the country. Those are just a few of the recent fetal experimentation projects at Pitt. It's been going on for decades, sometimes on babies delivered alive during later abortions. This is archival footage from the experiments filmed in the 1950s by Pitt's Dr. Davenport Hooker, who obtained live fetuses from abortions at Pitt's hospital and tested their reflexes until they died. A Pitt nurse testified in 1972 before the Pennsylvania legislature that she saw live fetuses from abortions being packed in ice and shipped off for experimentation at the university. Fetal research projects at Pitt generally obtain fetal tissue through the University of Pittsburgh Biospecimen Corps or Health Sciences Tissue Bank from local abortion providers. 2 years ago, sources told CMP that Pittsburgh was one of the major hubs of the FBI's investigation of Planned Parenthood's involvement in the human trafficking of aborted fetuses. This isn't surprising because CMP undercover investigators were told previously by Planned Parenthood Western Pennsylvania abortion doctors who were on staff at Pitt that they supply the university's tissue bank.
Have you guys ever participated in specimen donation in the
No,
past?
there's a tissue bank at Pitt that we offer patients to donate to.
So then why is the University of Pittsburgh telling news media, quote, there is no procurement relationship for tissue with Planned Parenthood?
There's a tissue bank at Pitt that we offer patients to donate to.
What is Pitt so afraid of admitting? Since 2005, the University of Pittsburgh has been a major location for Planned Parenthood's Ryan Residency and Family Planning Fellowship abortion training programs. Some of the most notorious Planned Parenthood abortion doctors came up through the program. Remember Dr. Jennifer Russo, the vice president of Planned Parenthood Orange and San Bernardino counties? She supplied the aborted fetuses to the criminal company Da Vinci Biosciences, which admitted illegally selling the fetal body parts and was shut down by local law enforcement. She did her abortion training fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Mitch Crennan is the Planned Parenthood research officer who used to run the abortion training program at Pitt and Planned Parenthood Western Pennsylvania. Now he develops experimental abortion techniques and tries to stop pregnant women who regret taking the chemical abortion pill from accessing the antidote. How about Dr. Ann Chudinay, the chief medical officer of the notorious Planned Parenthood Gulf Coast, which was terminated from Texas Medicaid due to their willingness to use partial birth abortions to sell fetal body parts. She too was trained at the University of Pittsburgh. Today, Dr. Beatrice Chen, the medical director of Planned Parenthood Western Pennsylvania, is in charge of the abortion training programs at Pitt. Dr. Sharon Achilles, the laboratory director at Planned Parenthood Western Pennsylvania and a prominent faculty member at Pitt, is on the Planned Parenthood Federation of America National Medical Committee. Planned Parenthood Western Pennsylvania, meanwhile, is a contracted care site for the University of Pittsburgh, receiving access to the medical students, medical resources, medical infrastructure, patient population, and referrals at the university system. So here's what we know, just from the publicly available sources. 1. Planned Parenthood abortionists supply the aborted fetuses to Pitt. 2. Pitt uses its access to the fetuses to get major NIH grant money. 3. Pitt sends major kickbacks and medical resources back to Planned Parenthood. It all starts to look suspiciously like an illegal quid pro quo over aborted fetal organs and body parts, all funded by taxpayers. Call your Pennsylvania representatives to demand answers and accountability from Planned Parenthood and the University of Pittsburgh now.
So that video is, ever since we produced that video in May, I felt that this story is probably one of the most disturbing ones that I've reported on in the past 8 to 10 years that I've been involved in investigative reporting on abortion and fetal experimentation issues. The fact pattern that is discussed in this video has only developed since the time that we released it in May. Just about 2 months ago in August, together with the organization Judicial Watch, Center for Medical Progress released the first set of FOIA documents that we got from the NIH under a Freedom of Information Act request for the original grant applications that the University of Pittsburgh submitted for the Good Map project, which you saw referenced briefly in the video. The Good Map project being this major distribution hub for aborted fetal kidneys and other genitourinary organ systems. At the time in this video, the time this video was made, based on the information that was already publicly available on the NIH website, we thought it was a total $1.4 million grant. In fact, the grant applications and the subsequent renewal applications that we got from the NIH in August, or that we released from the NIH in August, show that the total number is actually close to more than twice that amount, more than double that amount. This was an over $3 million grant from the NIH to the University of Pittsburgh to run this GoodMap aborted baby kidney distribution hub. And the statements in this grant application, keep in mind that an NIH grant application like this one, Pitt is basically advertising to the NIH why they're going to be the best location for this NIH baby parts harvesting program. And in the application, Pitt specifically advertises to the NIH that one of the reasons that they are going to be the best location for doing this is that they will take steps to minimize the ischemia time of the fetal kidneys. Ischemia time, or ischemia, according to the NIH medical definition, refers to the loss of blood supply or the loss of circulation to an organ. And so what Pitt says to the NIH in this application, they advertise that, quote, "We record the warm ischemic time on our samples and take steps to keep it at a minimum to ensure the highest quality biological specimens. We get feedback from our users and utilize this feedback to tailor our collection processes on a case-by-case basis to maximize the needs of investigators." Now, if you take what Pitt is saying here, just the plain language of it, when they say that they can track and record the warm ischemic time of the kidneys that they're harvesting. So that means they know the time at which the fetuses lose their circulation and lose their blood supply. They say that they're tracking and recording the warm ischemic time to the kidneys, and they are taking steps to keep that to a minimum. And then further on in the application, they specifically say that labor induction, not just a forceps extraction abortion, but a labor induction abortion where they just induce labor and the mom pushes out a premature baby at 16 to 24 weeks. Pitt specifically refers to labor induction in this application as, quote, "a procedure that will be used to obtain the tissue." So if you put those two statements together, that they're talking about, they know with scientific precision when blood circulation is going to be lost to the fetal kidneys. They're taking steps to keep that blood loss to a minimum, and they are using labor induction abortions as a method for tissue harvesting. That starts to look suspiciously like infanticide. And really there's no way to understand those statements other than these are either clear classic cases of partial birth abortion, or this is just straight up infanticide when a baby is delivered completely whole and alive, and then the cause of death is when they're cut open and the organs are harvested from them. Pitt, in responding publicly to the news articles when Judicial Watch and CMP published this information, the spokesperson for the University of Pittsburgh, David Selden, actually said to news media, "Yeah, you're right. The ischemia time in the application refers to the time after the tissue harvesting has been completed." So, meaning that at the time of the tissue harvesting procedure, there's no ischemia yet. There's still blood flow into the fetal organs. In addition, in the grant application, Pitt also set out explicitly racial quotas for the fetuses that they were going to harvest, and they said that they wanted 50% of them to come from white women and white babies, and they wanted 50% of the harvesting to come from minority infants and minority mothers, including 25% of those would be from black women and black babies. If you are familiar with the demographics of Allegheny County, which is the major metropolitan area where the patients at the McGee Women's Hospital for fetal harvesting and anywhere else in the University of Pittsburgh system they're doing it, are going to be coming from. Allegheny County is close to 80% white and only about 13% black. So this is massively disproportionate in the way that the burden of the fetal experimentation in the GoodMap project and elsewhere at the University of Pittsburgh disproportionately falls on minority communities. And so it adds, in my mind, that adds the malice of systemic racism to the already barbaric activity that happens in fetal experimentation. And that's something that, I grew up in the public school system in Northern California, you know, I thought that was something that was behind us decades and decades ago. And so it's just very sobering to see that in a well-funded, prestigious grant application to the Federal National Institutes of Health. This information was so disturbing that just about a month ago, it prompted nearly 100 federal representatives, so both House of Representatives, congressmen, as well as United States senators. I think there was a total of 19 U.S. senators who together wrote a very lengthy letter to the U.S. Department of Justice, to the Health and Human Services Department, and to the NIH with a lengthy document demand request seeking all kinds of primary source records about the Good Map project at the University of Pittsburgh and how it's been implemented. Today, October 12th, is actually the deadline for those federal agencies, the DOJ and the HHS and the NIH, to respond to that document request from Congress. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Although I did note last week, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Dr. Francis Collins, the longtime head of the NIH, just announced his resignation from NIH last week, the week before these document requests are due to the congressional investigators. Meanwhile, Dr. Jörg Gerlach, who is the Pitt scientist who was featured in the video doing the liver harvesting, again from infants who are delivered alive in labor induction procedures. Dr. Gerlach, meanwhile, will not speak publicly and refuses to respond to any press inquiries or any academic discussion inquiries about his research and exactly how he was obtaining those fetal livers with a massive number of stem cells. So Gerlach is refusing to talk, refusing to speak out, refusing to rebut any of the allegations and any of the facts that are publicly on the record about his experiments at Pitt. And meanwhile, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the head of the NIAID, which is actually responsible for approximately 60% of NIH funding of fetal experimentation across the country. Fauci, meanwhile, when confronted in a congressional hearing over the summer about the scalping study that his agency funded, Fauci actually defended it. And under oath in the congressional hearing, Fauci said, well, I think that study was done with all of the appropriate oversight for a fetal tissue study. Which is especially outrageous for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you read the research paper and you look at the amount of at the size of the fetal scalps, the actual scalps off of the heads of the babies that they needed in order to stitch onto these lab rats to keep them growing, you're only going to be able to get large area size intact scalps like that if it's basically a partial birth abortion procedure, because normally in a second trimester dismemberment abortion, the skull is going to be crushed, right? And so that's the typical cause of death for the fetus in a typical dismemberment forceps second trimester abortion. But if you're crushing the skull, you're not going to have you're going to have extremely macerated skin tissue on the head. The bones are all going to be broken. You're not going to have a full intact scalp that you need to stitch on the lab rats, certainly in the size of the scalps that they were using. So that's an indication that they were using partial birth abortions in order to get those intact heads. Fauci was asked specifically about that. He had no comment, nothing to say about it, other than he thought that it was done with the appropriate oversight. And in terms of the actual oversight that exists at Pitt for their fetal experimentation program, we've discovered in the months since the release of this video, due to some of the work by a really great whistleblower who's here with us today, Ryan Navarro, that the medical director of Planned Parenthood Western Pennsylvania, Dr. Beatrice Chen, featured in this video, who runs the abortion training program at the University of Pittsburgh, runs Planned Parenthood's abortion training fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh, oversees pretty much all the abortion practice in Pittsburgh, both at McGee and at Planned Parenthood on Liberty Avenue. She sits as vice chair of the Institutional Review Board at the University of Pittsburgh. The IRB, which is supposed to be the independent review board, which is supposed to be the independent patient protection and human subjects protection body that is involved in regulating and overseeing fetal experimentation and other research at research universities. So Dr. Chen is a supervising participant in every single fetal experimentation study that is approved at the University of Pittsburgh. So she's the one who's supposed to be in charge of making sure that the abortion doctors are not doing partial birth abortions, are not delivering infants alive. If they are, taking them to the NICU to get medical care for them, not harvesting their livers and their kidneys out of them. And yet she is the person who is in charge of all the abortions. She's also sitting on the IRB as the one who is determining whether these whether these are studies that who's supposed to be policing the compliance of the medical system at Pitt in these research studies. So there's a whole slew of both state and federal laws and also federal research regulations that are raised by these issues, and particularly that issue with Dr. Chen on the IRB is really just one of them. So there's supposed to be, according to the federal NIH regulations, a complete separation between the research apparatus and then the medical practice of the abortion clinic, but they're completely inseparable at the University of Pittsburgh right now. But the other laws that we're particularly concerned about in the fetal experimentation programs at Pitt include several provisions of the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act. If you look at section 3212 of the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act, that's the felony prohibition on infanticide that exists in Pennsylvania abortion law. A fetus born alive in Pennsylvania at any gestational age is protected by law. It's a felony to do anything to kill them, and they're required to be provided with whatever the medical standard of care would be for a premature infant born at the same age. And I note that the GoodMap grant application states that they're going to be getting kidneys from aborted fetuses in Pittsburgh of up to 6 months old, 24 weeks, which is several weeks past the age of viability. Section 3216 in the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act governs specifically fetal experimentation. There's two provisions in there. One is a provision that bans exchanging any consideration whatsoever for fetal tissue or for fetal remains. This is actually a provision that is even stricter than the federal law, because the federal law on trafficking human fetal tissue and human fetal body parts prohibits the exchange of valuable consideration. Consideration is a term from contract law that basically means the quid pro quo, or the exchange in the transaction, so what you are trading for what. It doesn't necessarily have to do with financial or accounting profit or loss. It primarily has to do with what does the transaction pivot on. What is the exchange without which you would not make the transfer of the body parts, and if that is money, it's valuable consideration. If it's some kind of benefit that's measurable, that is able to be valued under federal law, that's a federal felony. The Pennsylvania abortion control statute is written even more broadly. Doesn't even say valuable consideration, just says consideration. Any consideration whatsoever for fetal tissue is illegal. And then the second prong of the fetal experimentation statute in the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act specifically prohibits any experimentation on a living fetus, whether inside or outside the womb. So when you look at the statements in the GoodMap grant application that talk about tracking the ischemia time and recording it and making sure they know when it happens, when do the kidneys lose blood supply, things like that, certainly raises questions as to whether the experiment is actually starting while the child is still in the womb. If not, definitely raises questions about the experiments being done and the harvesting being done right after they've been born. And then section 3215, subsection C of the Abortion Control Act has to do with regulating and governing taxpayer funding and taxpayer support of abortion services in Pennsylvania. And 3215C specifically prohibits public funds from being used for, quote, the performance of an abortion. So I think that given the systemic enmeshment, that the systematic intermingling that the University of Pittsburgh academic side and sadly the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, UPMC, with the McGee Hospital, and then the Planned Parenthood abortion program and the Planned Parenthood abortion providers who basically run abortion at McGee and at Pitt, these groups and these individuals and these resources are so potentially intermingled that's something that should really be looked at with a very strict forensic audit as well. On the federal level, we're certainly concerned about all of the fetal experimentation statutes on a federal level. That's in Title 42 of the U.S. Code, sections 289G, 289G-1, and 289G-2. 289G is a specific prohibition on the Health and Human Services Department, including the NIH, including the NIAID, funding any live fetal experimentation unless it is specifically geared to try to save the life of the baby. So obviously, if you're delivering infants alive and you're cutting their kidneys out and harvesting their livers, that is not live fetal experimentation that is geared towards trying to save the life of that baby. So I think there's serious questions as to whether the NIH is in violation of its own authorizing statutes by funding many of these projects at the University of Pittsburgh. 289G-1 is the prohibition on, and it's been encoded through multiple subsequent NIH agency regulations, is the prohibition on changing, making any changes to the medical treatment of the pregnant woman, making any changes to the abortion procedure in order to harvest better quality fetal organs. And then 289G-2, as I was describing earlier, is the anti-sale or trafficking sale of fetal tissue statute that prohibits the transfer of fetal tissue for any valuable consideration whatsoever. And then we're also, of course, concerned about the federal criminal law on partial birth abortion, specifically at Title 18, U.S. Code 1531. That's the prohibition on partial birth abortion, which classically people have tended to think about or understand partial birth abortion as, we all have seen that image in the diagram, right, of the baby being ripped out with the forceps, feet first, all the way up to the head, and then the brain is either suctioned out or the skull is crushed. So that is sort of classic partial birth abortion, but the federal statute, the way that it defines and the conduct that it captures and that it prohibits, would apply also to delivering a baby alive with the purpose of killing the baby after delivery through organ harvesting or through other means. Also applies in basically the core of the federal partial birth abortion statute is at what point does the fetus die, and what anatomical landmarks have been to what anatomical landmarks has the baby been partially born already before the abortion provider kills the baby. And so it's very interesting. You look at the Good Map project, which is all about harvesting fetal kidneys, and anatomically, the kidneys actually sit above the level of the umbilical cord, above the level of the navel, and that is in the federal partial birth abortion law. That is the key element of the crime that you need to be able to prove for a violation of the federal partial birth abortion law, is that the baby was extracted past the level of the umbilical cord before killing them. So again, if they're trying to maintain blood flow into the fetal kidneys, they're trying to minimize the ischemia time. If they're extracting the baby up to the level of the kidneys in order to do that, and then they kill the baby, clear fact pattern for a criminal violation of the federal partial birth abortion law. So there's a lot of material here. There's a lot of pieces here. For I think vigorous legislative oversight from local legislators here in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of, I think, financial considerations that are prime for an audit from the Pennsylvania Auditor General, and the Pennsylvania Family Institute has been calling for that for the past couple of months. And there are actual potential criminal violations of Pennsylvania state law here, which ought to be investigated and taken seriously by the Allegheny County District Attorney. We're all familiar with the situation in Philadelphia over on the other side of the state over 10 years ago with Kermit Gosnell, who was able to continue his barbaric, disgusting abortion business for almost 2 decades because people knew and people reported him, but there was no follow-up and no one, people who knew didn't actually, and people in authority in the government who knew didn't actually do anything until it was almost too late. Kermit Gosnell was in many ways enabled by civic apathy and by the apathy or by the willful blindness of authorities in Pennsylvania The federal violations and the federal issues certainly under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania and the FBI field office out here. And then specifically, it's an interesting feature of the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act that the Pennsylvania Department of Health is specifically in charge of enforcing the prohibition on exchanging consideration for fetal body parts. And back when my first set of undercover videos were released in 2015, the Pennsylvania Health Department came out very quickly with this very kind of conspicuous denial that they had done a full investigation and there was no fetal organ harvesting or fetal tissue transfers with any Planned Parenthood involvement whatsoever happening in the state of Pennsylvania. And we now know that that's totally false because of the heavy involvement of the Planned Parenthood abortion providers in the fetal experimentation program at the University of Pittsburgh. So again, the Pennsylvania Department of Health, I think directly under the purview of the state legislature, that, I think it would be very interesting to find out exactly, what exactly did they do in that so-called investigation 6 years ago? What did they look at? Were they aware of what was happening in Pittsburgh and the fact that the Planned Parenthood medical director was sitting on the IRB overseeing and approving all of these research projects? And did they willfully and intelligently choose to cover it up for their own purposes? And those kind of dynamics point to what sadly I think is a real failure in accountability at the University of Pittsburgh and in some of the government offices that should be in charge of looking at this. Many of you are probably familiar with the news announced just about a month ago that the University of Pittsburgh said that they are now hiring a law firm to do a so-called independent review of the fetal experimentation at the University of Pittsburgh. I still, talking about whiplash, I'm still trying to figure out how hiring a law firm somehow counts as an independent review of your fetal tissue program. They could hire my lawyers in San Diego and it still wouldn't be good enough. Like that's not an investigation, that's hiring a law firm. And it's really unfortunate the more that Pitt starts to go on record about what exactly they're doing or not doing with this so-called law firm investigation, and the more that we're finding out. University of Pittsburgh, over the past year or so of this controversy, has been very adamant that University of Pittsburgh Academic is totally separate and a totally different organization from UPMC, from University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And they say, well, McGee Women's Hospital, which is where all the abortions are done and where the organ harvesting actually takes place, totally separate organization from University of Pittsburgh. We don't know anything about the medical practice that our faculty members do at McGee or about the fetal tissue harvesting at McGee that our academic IRB approves and then our researchers use. Really incredible that they can say that with a straight face and that anybody would believe them or that anybody would have patience with that. But so Pitt says that UPMC is totally different, totally separate, and they're hiring this law firm to do an investigation or an independent review of University of Pittsburgh academic side and their research policies. But so it looks like that won't even touch the abortion practice and the actual fetal tissue harvesting at McGee and potentially elsewhere, which is where the crux of the controversy and the crux of the violations really are. The question of whether this review is actually going to be made public, they were covering themselves in glory in their press releases about it, saying that this demonstrated their commitment to transparency and to openness, but now they're backtracking as to whether the results of this review will actually be made public or not. And so I actually think it's really important, and I'm glad that we have a Pennsylvania House representative on the panel today, because that review was in large part sort of launched by Representative Natalie Mihalik, who is up in sort of the northern, I guess her district is sort of the northernmost area of Pittsburgh. I have tried to reach out to Representative Mihalik about these issues and have a conversation about what exactly is the game plan with this review and what do they see their methodology being and everything. I've been waiting almost 2 weeks now to get a call back from her scheduler. Her scheduler have heard nothing. And so I think that it's, this is a pro-life Republican representative who sits on the Board of Trustees of the University of Pittsburgh. and has taken it upon herself to help launch this independent review. And there are serious, grave problems with the way that this review is being done. It looks like an obvious cover-up. And so I think it would be really unfortunate if Representative Mihalik is in the same position as the people who enabled Kermit Gosnell 10 years ago. So I think it's absolutely incumbent for everybody who's here today, call Representative Mihalik later today or later this week after this presentation. If you have friends and family who live in her district, have them call her and express the message that this so-called independent review of hiring a law firm to look at the University of Pittsburgh's research policies and ignore the abortion practice and the baby parts harvesting at McGee and at UPMC, that is not good enough. And that no Pennsylvania elected representative should be in the position of enabling what's happening at Pitt and enabling a cover-up like what was done with Kermit Gosnell. And to sort of conclude my remarks on that as a word of encouragement, so I'm coming to you today from Southern California, from Orange County, California. During the initial undercover investigation that Center for Medical Progress conducted in 2015, we were able to discover, and it was only through the undercover work that we actually discovered the name of one of the biggest and oldest baby parts companies that Planned Parenthood in Southern California was providing aborted fetuses to. This was the Da Vinci Biosciences company that was located in Orange County, California. We got the information undercover, we provided it to local law enforcement, they launched a full investigation, and ultimately they not only prosecuted the Da Vinci companies, Da Vinci ended up admitting guilt for illegally selling baby body parts from the local Planned Parenthood in a $7.8 million settlement, and they were totally shut down. And the reason that was able to happen was because the community in Orange County and in Southern California came together, and we expressed to elected representatives, we expressed to people who were responsible in local government for overseeing what happens in the community, protecting the community, that this was something that was unacceptable, that there needed to be accountability and it needed to stop. And so we were able to do that, and it's not everything, it's only just the beginning, but it is. But I do think it's a great example of what can happen when a community of conscientious people want to make sure that their voices are heard on these issues, and that everyone in their community, from the oldest to the youngest, including infants in the womb, including those delivered prematurely, are protected under law. So thank you guys for listening to me, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the rest of the
Sure. Meredith's going to be handing out some cards if folks have questions that we can take later on in the program. And I did say it was going to be a painful morning, and what David just talked about is painful. There's a photo at the front of the room on the left. Just, again, a picture of the aborted baby's hair growing on the back of a rat, mouse, rodent, whatever it was. I mean, yeah, when you explain that to somebody, there's a visceral reaction to that. And then the nuance comes in. You know, don't give in to the nuance. This is appalling that these kinds of experiments would be happening here, and it does not have to be that way. And Dr. Joseph Meany is going to be our next speaker on the panel. He's the president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center in Philadelphia. He received his PhD in bioethics from the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Rome. Dr. Meany earned his master's in Latin American Studies, focusing on healthcare in Guatemala, from the University of Texas at Austin, and he graduated from the University of Dallas with a BA in History with a concentration in International Studies. Dr. Meany.
Thank you very much. It's going to come on, yeah. Yes, thank you. It's, as you were saying, it's a painful morning, and I have to say, as the head of one of the largest ethics centers in the United States, one is almost speechless. You know, where do you begin when you talk about the ethics violations involved here? And we're very used to working with, medical researchers, scientific researchers, and all the protocols that are put into place so that abuses don't happen. Bioethics as a discipline was created in the latter part of the 20th century as a result of all the unconscionable human experiments that were done, both during the Second World War, but also here in the United States, the famous Tuskegee experiments, etc. And one of the pillars, the principal basic requirements for research is that you have free and informed consent. That individuals realize what the risks and dangers are, what is actually going on, what the potential benefits are. And when you look at the whole area, right, of embryonic research and fetal research, free and informed consent, there's just a mockery of that. First of all, an individual needs to provide free and informed consent themselves. Obviously that can't happen in some circumstances, so then a proxy can provide free and informed consent. And that person has to be either appointed by the person or have a very close relationship to them and acting in that person's best interests. And the thought that the mother who has just decided to abort her child can sign a consent form for their organs and tissues to be researched upon goes against the basic principle of free and informed consent, that the proxy actually has to be working in the best interest of that person. And just transpose that to an adult. If an individual, a loved one, organized the death of their adult friend, adult family member, and then signed over the consent for their organs to be donated, that would be completely and utterly unacceptable. And yet, that is what is being done here. Well, that is what is being presented. And the very sad thing about the University of Pittsburgh in particular, right, is that they're not only doing these gruesome experiments, they're not only justifying this as ethical research, but they're trying to become a hub, right, a center to provide this and to make it easier for scientists all across the country to do this research. So in a sense, we're kind of at the center of an incredible evil that needs to be confronted. And it's just a beautiful thing to be able to stand up and say, not here, right? We will not tolerate this in this beautiful, wonderful place. And the other thing that's really, as I was saying, you don't know where to start when you talk about all the ethics violations involved here. But one looks at the fact that there is always an ethical way to do scientific research. Where there is a will, there is a way. And the shortcuts are based on the culture of death. Culture of death is all about shortcuts, right? If you have a crisis pregnancy, we have the 15-minute solution for that. If an individual is sick and dying, we have an injection for that, or a pill for that. And it's sad to see the shortcuts that are taken. Now, when people take the ethics seriously, in the case of embryonic stem cells, the fetal stem cells, which are obtained by killing these human embryos, right? And completely unacceptable to kill the patient in order to do medical research. Japanese researchers said, no, that's not acceptable. And they created the induced pluripotent stem cells, which actually yielded cures, yielded therapies, which the embryonic stem cells did not. And that is the other part, right? Women in abortion centers are being asked to sign consent forms saying that this fetal research on their child's organs or tissues have yielded cures for AIDS, for cancer, for all kinds of different things. Now, there is no cure for AIDS. There are therapies that have been good, and help, but there is no cure for AIDS. There's no cure for cancer either. So just that statement is false. But none of the fetal tissue research has yielded any of the positive therapies. It's almost a mockery of science, but people are being misled on so many different levels. And one cannot have consent, right, when there's false information that is provided. And that is, thoroughly the case when you get involved in the abortion industry. There's so many lies that are involved with that. And that the University of Pittsburgh should be so closely, hand in hand, working together with these individuals who, by the very fact that they're involved in the killing of unborn children, have shown that their ethics are lacking. And that there could be sources, many, many good sources for good research. We're not against medical research, not against scientific research, only ones that respect the dignity of the human person. So I will just end there and say, thank you for coming, thank you for being concerned, and thank you for not tolerating that this should continue any longer.
meeting. You know, among the questions that get begged by this whole disclosure is when a woman who is going in for an abortion is obviously in distress because I don't think anybody wants to have an abortion, but very often a woman would feel that she has no choice at this point in her life. And to be handed a piece of paper to sign something, oh, well, at least something good is going to happen here, we'll do some research. I doubt very much that it's explained the types of research that are going to be doing. Because it would beg too many questions for the woman. Imagine a researcher saying, by the way, we're going to take part of the head of your unborn child, and we're going to graft it on the back of a rodent. And we'll see what happens, and maybe your child's hair will grow. And once you start talking like that, I think it's going to have a real chilling impact on a woman's desire to have the abortion, or the need to have the abortion. Our next speaker is Cecily Routman. Ms. Routman founded the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation, a 501c3 educational organization, in 2006. She's a native of Pittsburgh, and she obtained her master's in social work from the University of Pittsburgh. Cecily is a member of Congregation Havath Achim, a traditional synagogue located in Carnegie, Pennsylvania, as well as a member of Beit Emmanuel, I think I'm saying this, Beit Amuna. She and her husband Tom live here in the Pittsburgh area, and since its founding, the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation has been saving Jewish lives by promoting life-saving solutions to unplanned pregnancy within the Jewish community. The foundation provides education about the development, viability, and sanctity of unborn life, as well as traditional Jewish law regarding abortion. Ms. Routman.
Thank you. And thank you, David, for your courageous efforts to let the world know about the atrocities being perpetrated at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Laboratories. And thank you to the organizers of this event for allowing the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation to speak here today. Welcome, everyone. When I learned of the devastating torture and execution of living babies to procure their organs for medical research at Pitt, I immediately recalled the horror stories I'd learned about the Auschwitz death camp, where Jewish prisoners were tortured during medical experiments, including having their internal organs removed without the use of pain medication. Most perished, but a few survived. Here's an account of one such survivor from Newser. An Auschwitz survivor finally saw a doctor for the first time in 65 years after suffering a near-fatal heart attack. Upon recovery, the 85-year-old Israeli man explained why. As a young man imprisoned at the camp, notorious Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele tied him to a table and removed his kidney without anesthesia. Quote, "I saw the kidney pulsing in his hand and I cried like a crazy man. I screamed the Shema Yisrael. I begged for death to stop the suffering." End quote. Jews in Auschwitz were captive subjects of medical experiments done without anesthesia. They lacked personhood and protection under law. The babies who are tortured and sacrificed for medical experimentation at Pitt similarly are denied personhood and protection under law. In correspondence with Pennsylvania state lawmakers, Vice Chancellor Paul Subowitz said that no wrongdoing is happening at the university. Mr. Subowitz and guests here today, I ask you, did Joseph Mengele and his ilk do nothing wrong? Is the university doing nothing wrong? Assistant Vice Chancellor of Communications David Selden justifies Pitt's racial quotas in their medical research as defensible efforts helpful to minority communities. He is on record saying that the university has no accountability in connection with how infant tissue is harvested, even though university faculty and staff work in conjunction with local and university-connected abortion clinics. Nazi propagandists claimed that racially targeted torture in medical experiments was excusable for humanitarian purposes. To explain the concentration camp experiments, Nazi doctor August Hirt supplied this rationale, quote, "These condemned men will at least make themselves useful," he said. "Wouldn't it be ridiculous to execute them and send their bodies to the crematory oven without giving them an opportunity to contribute to the progress of society?" End quote. Mr. Selden and guests here today, I ask you, did Dr. Hirt and his help do nothing wrong? Is the university doing nothing wrong? With every induced abortion and every exploitation of that baby for profit, personal gain, or political power, never again becomes once again. Not only in America, but also in communist China, where the CCP tortures and executes thousands of innocent people every year in order to harvest their internal organs for sale. Most of the world continues to do business with China, despite much evidence of this and other human rights atrocities. Sad to say, America has sunk to the level of the godless communists and brutal fascists by doing the same to our most defenseless citizens and carrying on business as usual. History shows that the human heart and mind can be shaped by messaging, example, and education. Noted psychologist Jordan Peterson warns us that each one of us is capable of being a guard at Auschwitz. The power of propaganda and coercion is how a nation that once respected the right to life for all its citizens has dehumanized infant life and come to accept abortion as birth control. And it is how a university health system rationalizes torturing infants as a normal, ethically defensible element of medical research. It is the explanation of how an abortionist can destroy infants in the womb for a sizable fee and induce live births of viable, healthy infants, and working with university researchers, excise livers, kidneys, hearts, scalps, brains, and arms and legs from these flourishing youngsters for a huge profit. Does the audience here today know that later-term abortion from which these infants are obtained costs $8,000 to $15,000, and that infant brains cost $3,300, and livers cost $600, and arms and legs cost $860? And these prices were quoted before the current inflation. German public health officials first executed the mentally and physically disabled, later expanding their murderous public health schemes to include millions of Jews and other marginalized groups. Do you think that the NIH will go no further than babies with their funding of gruesome medical research projects? History suggests that immoral and tyrannical public health programs will expand to include many other Americans who remain undisturbed and unaffected today. The Jews and other prisoners in the death camps were liberated in 1945 by Allied forces led by United States soldiers. At that time, our nation protected human rights and civil liberties at home and abroad. Our government no longer protects the weak and the powerless. On the contrary, our government targets the youngest among us for legalized destruction and pays for it through our tax dollars. Our representatives are not coming to the rescue of these children without great pressure from American citizens to defund any activities that torture and slaughter infant life. From abortion methods done without pain medication that starve, poison, and dismember their perfect bodies, and from the pain and terror of organ procurement once aborted infants are out of the womb and alive and breathing. After defunding, the precedent of the Nuremberg trials held after World War II can be used to designate medical experimentation on helpless infants as criminal acts and prosecute those responsible. The screams of pain and terror of these innocent babies go unrecorded, but scream they do. And we must give them justice and dignity by doing all we can to stop the madness. I leave you with this quote from Proverbs 24. Rescue those being led away to death. hold back those staggering torts tomorrow. If you say, but we knew nothing about this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay everyone for what they have done? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Cecily, for that painful reminder of the tragedy of the last century. And she mentioned Nuremberg, where those who were put on trial wanted to defend themselves by saying, well, it's legal. Martin Luther King had a lot to say about that. And if you have never read his letter from the Birmingham jail, you must read it. Because there he talks about the nature of law, the nature of law being just and unjust, tying it to the natural law, which was certainly discussed at Nuremberg, and to have an outside standard of what law ought to be is critical as we look at these issues. Our next speaker knows a lot about law, a lawyer, a judge. Judge Cheryl Allen became the first African-American woman to be elected to the Pennsylvania Superior Court in 2007. She's a Pittsburgh native and former Pittsburgh public school teacher. She's a graduate of Penn State University and the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. She spent 15 years practicing law before earning a merit selection appointment to the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas in 1990. She was elected to that court in 1991 and retained in 2001. She is currently of counsel with the Pennsylvania Family Institute and the Independence Law Center. She also serves on boards including the Hosanna House and Neighborhood Academy. She is also a Waynesburg University trustee. Judge.
Thank you, Congressman Rothfuss, and thank you for inviting me, giving me an opportunity to be heard. As I was reflecting on my remarks today, and in keeping with the recommendations of the Congressman, I found myself reading the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. And you're all familiar with that preamble. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And these rights include the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I repeat, endowed by our Creator. And so, in essence, what is meant by that is that all men are created equal, that people have certain inalienable rights, and that individuals have a civic duty to defend these rights for themselves and for others, especially those who are unable to defend themselves, our unborn. Now, this was written by Thomas Jefferson in 1776. And less than 100 years later, when Abraham Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address, he spoke of a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. In 1963, in his I Have a Dream speech, Dr. Martin Luther King cited the Declaration of Independence, that all men, not some men, and that one day this nation would rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, which is that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to the pursuit of happiness. Now, obviously, the University of Pittsburgh, my alma mater, in 2015 recognized the need for equality, for fairness, and they developed the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I point this out to you because in developing this office, they also put forth an anti-racism statement. And if I could just read a brief part of that statement to you. The Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, OEDI, at the University of Pittsburgh affirms its commitment to recognizing, addressing, and eradicating all forms of racism and ethnic oppression. We commit to engaging stakeholders both within and outside of the university in an effort to advance collaborative service and scholarship that combats oppression and bias. The OEDI seeks to empower students, colleagues, and our community members toward the goal of ending racial and ethnic discrimination with focused attention on confronting anti-Black racism. Now, if that's the goal of the university in establishing its Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, then how can the University of Pittsburgh justify working with Planned Parenthood and the entire abortion industry on any level? Because Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry owe their very existence to racism. They owe their existence to the racist eugenic agenda launched by Margaret Sanger in the early 1900s. And Margaret Sanger made no bones about the fact that the goal was to decimate the Black community through eugenics. And as a result, since Roe v. Wade, more than 20 million Black babies have been destroyed. Today's numbers, that's half of the Black population. In Pennsylvania, 40% of all Black babies are aborted. And that is considering the fact that in Pennsylvania, Black people only comprise about 12% of the population. Sounds like disparity to me. And it's my understanding from modern thinkers that disparity and racism are synonymous. Under the guise of wanting to help poor Black women, we have a lawsuit pending, or to be argued, soon to be argued before our Pennsylvania Supreme Court, where Planned Parenthood voices new voices for reproductive justice. I don't know what reproductive justice means. I have yet to figure that one out. And the Allegheny Women's Reproductive Health Center, they are arguing that Black women are being denied access to abortion because public taxpayer money through Medicaid is not permitted to be used for abortion. They're arguing that Black women are victims of systemic racism because they are not being allowed to utilize taxpayer money to kill even more Black babies. So how is the University of Pittsburgh working with Planned Parenthood? How does the University of Pittsburgh, which claims to be through their anti-racism statement, how are they working with Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry? Now, there's no question that the abortion industry has as its objective the elimination of Black people. The late Justice Ginsburg, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in a 2009 interview with the New York Times, is quoted, "Frankly, I had thought that at the time Roe was decided, there was concern about population growth, and particularly growth in the populations we don't want to have too many of." Who might that be? Justice Clarence Thomas, in the case of the Supreme Court case of Box versus Planned Parenthood of Indiana and Kentucky, he talked about the disparities and the fact that black women are more than 3 times as likely as a white woman to have an abortion. And he asked, how abortion as a method of family planning, why as abortion as a method of family planning, blacks take the brunt of the planning. And so, again, I ask the question, if University of Pittsburgh is seeking to eradicate racism, eradicate discrimination, and having put out and published an anti-racism statement, how can they justify working with Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry? As a matter of conscience, we must oppose the use of taxpayer funding for a policy of killing infants. And I ask, what kind of human beings, what kind of conscience must these people have? A seared conscience, perhaps? Because what can be more hateful and more unjust than experimenting on innocent babies, 25% of which are black, in a county where only about 13% of the population is black, and if you consider the entire western Pennsylvania metropolitan area, that number is even lower. Now, I have to bring this up because we're talking about Dr. Gosnell, and we were talking about the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act and the penalties for infanticide. But Gosnell was not convicted strictly under the Abortion Control Act because he was convicted of 7 counts of first-degree murder. First-degree murder is premeditated murder, for which one can receive the death penalty. He was also convicted of 1 count of involuntary manslaughter, 21 felony counts involving late-term abortions, and 211 counts of violating the 24-hour informed consent law. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. If what Pitt is doing with regard to harvesting baby organs and body parts is legal or is ethical, but let's focus on legal, then why is Kermit Gosnell serving time in jail? I fail to see the difference. Because if if labor is induced, a baby is born alive, like many of the babies that Gosnell aborted in the late-term stages of pregnancy. If these babies are born alive and kept alive long enough to harvest their organs, for financial gain, I might add, then why is Kermit Gosnell in jail? Now, Kermit Gosnell belongs in jail, but, do we have a 14th Amendment where people receive equal protection and equal treatment under the law or not? And so, I would just like to close by saying that human life matters. All human life matters. Black, white, born, unborn. Human life matters. And we have a responsibility to speak out, to be heard, to do everything that we can to protect the most innocent members of our society, those who cannot speak for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Several weeks ago, our United States House of Representatives passed a bill, which I don't think is going to get anywhere near the Senate, that was very radical, very extreme on abortion. And it would legalize abortion up until the date of birth, destroy any kind of conscience protection. And in the debate on that, Nancy Pelosi, our Speaker, expressed concern that access to abortion has been deficient for people of color. The judge cited the statistic of 40% of abortions in Pennsylvania occurring on black babies. Nationally, it's 38%. Yet you have a Speaker of the House who believes that access to abortion for minorities is deficient. Really begs another question. How many percent is enough? It's mind-boggling the traps that these folks advocating for this violation of fundamental human rights, violation of the principles that Judge Allen talked about in our Declaration, the ones that Abraham Lincoln talked about being transcendent, the ones that Martin Luther King talked about being the promissory note that for black Americans in 1963 had been marked insufficient funds, and it was time to ensure that those principles in our Declaration of Independence applied to everybody. And that's the same debate we're talking about today. Our next speaker is Representative Tim Bonner. He is a member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. He was elected in 2020 to represent the residents of the 8th Legislative District, just north of here. Representative Bonner is a graduate of Westminster College and my alma mater, the University of Notre Dame Law School, where we learned about the natural law, about transcendent rights. He practices law with McNichol and Bonner in Grove City. In addition to his law practice and serving in the State House, Tim also teaches law and government at Grove City College. Previously, he served the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and Mercer County as a prosecutor for 18 years. Representative Bonner.
Thank you for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you here today.
You turned it off, I think.
Is that any better?
Yes.
In 1857, in the Dred Scott case, the Supreme Court ruled that a slave who was located in a free state was not a person, but rather the slave was property, and the slave must be returned to the rightful owner, the slave master, in the slave state. This decision greatly divided this nation, brother against brother, slave against master, the northern states against the southern states. The Civil War was the end result of this devastating court decision, which many legal scholars say is the most abominable decision ever made by a court in the United States of America. In 1973, the United States Supreme Court again ruled who was not a person. And this time, the court ruled that the child in the womb was not a person, and therefore was not entitled to constitutional rights, but rather the unborn in the womb was a cluster of cells. And therefore, the mother had the right to remove the cell cluster from her body at any point in time prior to viability, even over the objection of the natural father. The court ruled that the mother's right of privacy overrode any protection or rights of the child in the womb, even though the mother's alleged right of privacy under the Constitution is nowhere mentioned in the United States Constitution. Each time the United States Supreme Court has attempted to define a person under the law, it has tragically failed, causing great pain and conflict in this nation. It took a civil war to overturn the first tragic decision of the United States Supreme Court. Hopefully this time, the United States Supreme Court will recognize the tragedy of their decision and reverse the ruling to end this national nightmare. Abortion has been known since the earliest annals of mankind. However, since the 4th century following the death of Jesus Christ, upon the Christianizing of the Roman Empire, abortion has been outlawed or shunned in all of Western civilization until the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 2017. Russia became the first Western society to legalize abortion in 1920 as part of its movement to eliminate all remnants of the Christian church in Russia. Abortion remained an option in Russia until 1936, when Russia realized that German aggression was building on its western border. And they outlawed abortion in 1936 solely for the purpose to rebuild its army in the face of German aggression. Following the war, in 1956, Russia, not fearing Germany at this time in history, allowed abortion to occur again, to the point where now 70% of all pregnancies in Russia are terminated by abortion. The feminist and liberal movement in the 1960s led to a desire for change by many of the abortion policy in the United States. Even the most liberals were shocked, however, with the decision of Roe v. Wade. The thought was that the court would determine when life actually began within the womb, or they would just say, let the states individually determine what their abortion policy should be. However, they made a very sweeping and unexpected decision, much to the delight of the abortionists and the liberal movement. What is very inconsistent and puzzling in the United States Supreme Court's decision of Roe v. Wade was how it ignored past precedent in the law. And I'm sure, as all of you know, precedent is the very foundation of our legal system. Under past law, the fetus in the womb was recognized as having legal rights. Yet this argument was not well presented to the United States Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade. For instance, anyone who intentionally harms the fetus in the womb, other than the mother and her medical assistants, will face criminal charges for the injury or death of the fetus. Treating the fetus as human life in the womb for this purpose, as opposed to the Supreme Court's finding that it's simply a cluster of cells. If it is wrong for someone else, criminally wrong for someone else, to intentionally harm the fetus in the womb, it is criminally wrong for the mother and the medical assistants to do the same to the fetus in the womb. It is not simply a cluster of cells. Additionally, if someone negligently causes harm to the child in the womb, the child can bring a lawsuit against that person who injured the child negligently in the womb. Clearly, the law historically has recognized the fetus in the womb as a person who has legal rights. Furthermore, if a man dies leaving his estate to his children, at the time of his death, the child in the womb was not born. Under law, the child inherits part of the father's estate, even though not born at the time of the father's death. For many purposes then, under the law, prior to Roe v. Wade, the law has historically recognized as a person the fetus in the womb, which is all the more shocking, the decision of the Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade saying that the fetus is simply a cluster of cells. The law has recognized the fetus in the womb as a person, giving the fetus in the womb the right to sue in the event they're harmed in the womb by others, the right to be a victim of a crime, and the right to inherit under their family's estate. The fetus in the womb then has all the rights of you and I as human beings, except now the most basic right, the right to life. I'd like to close my remarks by just covering some of the activity that is going on in the Pennsylvania State Legislature relative to abortion issues. As David noted, we have a responsibility as members of the General Assembly to address the issues that are being raised here today. David testified in front of the Health Committee this past spring, of which I am a member. I appreciated his testimony. We gave the University of Pittsburgh an opportunity to also respond to the allegations of David. And who did they send? They sent a very fine gentleman, very knowledgeable, but who had only been at Pitt 6 months and had no clue of the fetal research program that was undergoing at Pitt. And in fact, Pitt had moved much of their research over to facilities in Italy to avoid the scrutiny of Pennsylvania law, which is an issue I particularly pressed the Pitt representative, who continually said, I do not really have that much knowledge of what has gone on in Italy. But we will not let that answer rest. We will continue with the University of Pittsburgh. There are meetings going on now to attempt to gain additional information and frankly redress the insult that they gave to the Health Committee of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives by canceling at the last moment the speaker who should have been there to answer these questions, and providing this gentleman who knew little about the Pitt research program. However, there has still been some legislative activity in the abortion arena over the past year. One of the bills that I co-sponsored was to give the fetus dignity at the time of death. The remains of the fetus are often discarded as medical waste upon the commission of abortion. A family must affirmatively ask for those remains to dispose of them as they see best. I sponsored a bill that gave in death what the fetus could not obtain in life: final dignity and respect. This bill passed the General Assembly, but Governor Wolf has vetoed. Interestingly, there has not been a veto overridden in Pennsylvania in 10 years. There's simply not the votes there to overturn a governor's veto. Maybe that day will come, but we're not there yet. I've also sponsored legislation known as the pain relief for the fetus. This bill, interestingly, has drawn the ire of the Philadelphia Inquirer, which then my county newspaper republished as an editorial. Under this bill, Any abortion that is performed in Pennsylvania would require the fetus to be given pain medication as their body parts are pulled apart. This is a very gruesome procedure, and certain medical experts say that the fetus cannot detect pain until 23 weeks of gestation. I find that to be unconvincing. I have done research on the issue. There are physicians who say that no, the fetus at 12 weeks of age can experience pain. But regardless, even those physicians who say, no, it's 23 weeks, they acknowledge that there's no way to absolutely prove their position because they've never been able to talk with or experience what a fetus is undergoing in this abortion procedure. So there is some doubt about what pain a fetus may be experiencing during this termination of life. My bill will require that any time an abortion is performed in Pennsylvania, that the fetus is given pain medication as its limbs are torn from its body, as its chest and head are crushed and then removed from the body. Now the fetus receives no pain medication. Interestingly also, any time a medical procedure is performed in the womb for a corrective medical act on a fetus, which now is commonly done, regardless of the age, pain medication is given to that fetus. So if the medical providers recognize that pain medication should be given when the fetus is having corrective surgery, and they have noticed that the blood pressure and the heart rate and the movement of the fetus during these corrective procedures is much more extensive and increased because of the penetration into the womb. The same thing is happening to a far worse degree when an abortion is being performed. I close my remarks by saying to you that the battle has just begun, that the future does offer hope, and that we are very much counting on a United States Supreme Court that now has members who are supportive and sympathetic to the most innocent of life, the fetus in the womb. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bonner. Let's have a round of applause for our entire panel here. A number of questions have been coming up from the audience. I want to try to get to as many of them as we can. A common question was the availability of this recording video. It's being live streamed right now on Pennsylvania Family Institute's site, on the Center for Medical Progress's site. There will be archived, yes, so people can access
it after.
those. So I would, what's the CMP website?
CMP.org.
Yeah. CMP.org. And
Good.
Centerformedicalprogress.org.
And the Pennsylvania Family Institute is what?
PAFamily.org.
PAFamily.org. Here's a question for Mr. Daleiden. Do you know if any other objectionable research is being done within Pennsylvania besides what you uncovered at Pitt?
Yeah, so we're certainly concerned about a similar kind of fact pattern over in Pennsylvania. There's a very big Planned Parenthood research affiliate, Planned Parenthood of Southeast Pennsylvania, which is based out of Philadelphia. I actually spoke with a whistleblower from Planned Parenthood Southeast Pennsylvania probably about 10 years ago, I want to say, who had mentioned that their consent forms at that clinic included fetal tissue harvesting, and that was the extent that she knew based on that. She was like a scheduler or something. So Planned Parenthood of Southeastern Pennsylvania has a similar abortion training relationship with Penn, Penn State over in Philadelphia. So Penn operates a Planned Parenthood abortion training fellowship similar to the one at Pitt. I believe there was a Penn, some kind of Penn representative who testified before the health committee, and in the series of hearings that Representative Rapp had about that. So there's fetal experimentation happening at other universities in Pennsylvania. Penn is one of the most prominent ones. There's a few others on the eastern part of the state who have been involved in the whole abortion training mix. But we seem to see this pattern across the country where you have basically a big Planned Parenthood surgical abortion facility, like Planned Parenthood Western Pennsylvania or Planned Parenthood Southeastern Pennsylvania, or Planned Parenthood Gulf Coast in Houston, Texas, or Planned Parenthood of the Pacific Southwest in San Diego, California. And these regional offices are like joined at the hip with their local research universities. So UC San Diego in Southern California, Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, Pitt and Penn over here, Mount Sinai School of Medicine up in New York City with Planned Parenthood New York City. And so they're partnered with these research universities to both run the abortion training program, and then at the same time, the Planned Parenthood abortion doctors are available to provide the fresh, high-quality fetuses for experimentation that the universities get major taxpayer research grants for. So yeah, there's definitely other places in Pennsylvania that we're concerned about it and we're looking at.
Yeah, and I think one of the takeaways from the work that you've exposed over the last year, and really more than a year, one thing that I was really unaware of was the involvement with abortion training. At state taxpayer-funded institutions. The University of Pittsburgh, I think, gets over $200 million a year from state money. So I think one of the things the state legislature needs to be looking at, is to really ask whether institutions that receive a single dime of Pennsylvania taxpayers' funds should be involved in abortion training. Philadelphia, 1776, we recognized inalienable rights there. And for the people of this Commonwealth to be having their taxpayer dollars go to institutions where this is done is just really unconscionable. Let's see. David, here's a question about the issues you've had to deal with. We know that you're facing legal issues. Can you give us an update of and how people might go to help on that?
Sure. So after the first set of undercover videos, after the undercover video series was released in 2015, Planned Parenthood and their allies retaliated viciously. They filed multiple federal civil lawsuits, all in San Francisco federal court. They had a very special judge there who they had picked out, who himself had founded a Planned Parenthood abortion referral clinic before he was a judge, and that abortion referral clinic was actually feeding pregnant patients into the same Planned Parenthood facilities that we were exposing for fetal tissue harvesting. So pretty much all of the civil cases are all going up on appeal now. Planned Parenthood did not just talk with civil cases. They got their ally in the California Attorney General office at the time, Kamala Harris, to launch the first ever in California history, the first ever criminal prosecution under the California video recording law. Undercover video, undercover journalism is legal and widely practiced in the state of California by many local TV news journalists who are exposing fraudulent air conditioning repairmen, unlicensed marijuana dispensaries, like all kinds of stuff, including sometimes filming in places that you really kind of wonder, this looks like a confidential setting, like inside somebody's home, and other places where you really think they probably are not allowed to do that under the law because that's truly a private area and a private conversation. But even though I just recorded in places of public accommodation, crowded public restaurants and hotel lobbies, in the state of California, and yet myself and one of my undercover investigators found ourselves to be the first ever people criminally charged for undercover video reporting in the 60-year history of that California law. That case has about half the charges been thrown out already, about half of it sort of remains. But we are just now starting to find out a lot more this summer about the specific illegal kinds of collusion that took place between the California Attorney General's office under Kamala Harris and Planned Parenthood leadership at the National Abortion Federation. We're actually developing evidence that the prosecutor in this case took the fruits of the search warrant that they served on my home and gave that to Planned Parenthood and NAF immediately afterwards. And we actually have the attorney billing records from the National Abortion Federation that they had to turn over in their case seeking attorney's fees that show the day after the Kamala Harris search warrant on my home, the day after the top NAF attorney says we are now coordinating the review of the new videos. The only new videos they could have gotten in my case at that point is the stuff from the search warrant. We didn't produce anything else in civil discovery for another year and a half after that point. So this is very serious. The state judge, who is not the Planned Parenthood Clinic founder, but the state judge in San Francisco seems to be taking that issue very seriously. The prosecutor has been ordered to provide further testimony, information about what exactly happened there by October 22nd. If it's as bad as it looks like it is, the appeals of the civil case may not even matter. This might be enough to throw everything out because it's gross prosecutorial misconduct on the criminal side, and then in order to illicitly benefit Planned Parenthood and NAF in order to win in their outside civil cases by providing them search warrant seized material. So basically, it's all a very scary attack on First Amendment rights, on the right of the public to know and to listen to what people have to say about matters of public importance. It's a discriminatory application of the law, weaponizing the judicial system to try and silence a particular message that is difficult and bedeviling for organizations and entities who have a lot of power and have a lot to lose. And it's not just even about the First Amendment and silencing speech, it's also about obstruction of justice. Kamala Harris came after me, seized my materials, tried to shut me up on Planned Parenthood's explicit instructions because they knew that they were under investigation in the state of California by local law enforcement for their illegal relationship with companies like Da Vinci Biosciences. They know that they're vulnerable. They know that they're legally vulnerable in places like Pittsburgh and Houston and other places. And so it was precisely in order to try to gum up the works, to try to cover the evidence, to try to discredit the allegations, and to try to obstruct justice in the ongoing investigations of Planned Parenthood and their baby parts business, that Kamala Harris and the California justice system was weaponized against me and against my colleagues. So that is the magnitude of the stakes at issue. That's the magnitude of the cover-up. You see, we're finding out now how this goes to the highest levels of the NIH and some of the highest levels of federal bureaucracy. It stretches into the Vice President's office. It stretches into the highest levels of academia at Pitt and elsewhere, and the national abortion industry is front and center in the middle of it. So,
How can folks help?
so you can always help if you go to our website, centerformedicalprogress.org. We're a tax-exempt 501c3 organization. You can support our work there. Please continue to like and share the videos, share the information that we're publishing, and know that now is not a time to be on the defensive. Now is not a time to be a victim. Now is a time to be a survivor. And now is the time to continue to press for victory because we're very close.
And given that fact pattern, if you haven't done it already, I hope you're contemplating your own civil rights lawsuit against the actors.
Yes, we have one filed. It's kind of on hold right now given some of the other things happening, but that is waiting in the wings, definitely.
Judge Allen, how has the black baby abortion rate affected the relative populations of minorities? Black versus Hispanic, Asian over the last decades?
I can't speak for the Asian population, I'm sorry.
It's on.
It's on.
I can't speak for the Asian population. I do know that the abortion rate among Black citizens is the highest of any ethnic group in this country, and I believe that the Hispanic rate of abortion is next. And I also might add, I read the numbers. I think that the Pitt put out those numbers. Am I correct in that, David?
The quota?
The quota, yes. Where they actually gave the numbers of the babies that were experimented on. And I think the quota rate for Black babies was maybe higher than 25%. And in Western Pennsylvania, unlike other metropolitan areas, we don't really have a large Hispanic population or Asian population like you might find in Philadelphia or New York. And so the largest minority population here by far would be African Americans. And so, you know, I find it disingenuous to even suggest that 25% of these babies are minorities.
Which
In addition to the 25% that are African American.
And inevitably, that's going to put pressure on people searching for the materials they want. And so they're going to be more encouraging if a woman comes in. Oh, we got to get that number up.
Well, that's what putting profits before people does.
Dr. Meany, Mr. Daleiden talked about the Institutional Review Board and the apparent conflict of interest. I mean, are you aware of anything at the federal level that would need to be changed, or the federal law is just not being enforced in that context of what the makeup of an Institutional Review Board is? Do we need to change some regulations here, or just enforce the ones we have?
So something that was really tragic, and I wrote a blog post on this, was the previous administration had put together an ethics committee for all kinds of research, and the Biden administration abolished the committee. It was a little bit similar to the President's Council on Bioethics, which then President Obama abolished. There was the clear statement, right, that there was no real ethical concern here. Therefore, we don't need an ethics review committee. And so, sad to say, it seems like there's politics involved here rather than good ethics. It's really unfortunate to see how the pro-abortion side has gone further than just promoting abortion, but really saying we're going to redefine what ethics is, you know, what truth and what is acceptable.
Should we cancel our UPMC coverage? Obviously, you know, it'd be tempting to, but we're limited with what we have out there. So I think certainly reaching out to the insurance company and saying, hey, we want some changes here. Can Pitt alumni get involved? We have a few Pitt alumni on the panel up here. Suggestions to reach out to the university? I know I wrote a letter to the university. Certainly, I think the alumni should reach out and express their concern. They're more than concerned, they're outraged. What's going on here? I don't know if there's a Pitt alumni group specific to pro-life. I know there was a chapter of Pitt Students for Life. If you're a Pitt alumni, you want to support that group, I think that's a very worthwhile group. As a mom of young children, I often feel I cannot or am not doing enough to procure change. What is the most effective way for the average person to help the pro-life cause? Cecily, any thoughts on that?
Okay. As I mentioned in my talk, education has a lot to do with how people think and feel about these issues. It's very important to teach young children about the sanctity of human life and how that's threatened in our world. I'm thinking of a poster that has a picture of a young gal tossing a baby behind her shoulder, and it says, "Abortion teaches our children that life is cheap." And So that, and also the culture and the programs that kids watch today, they are antithetical to ethics and morals, right? So they're inundated with these death culture messaging really early. So parents really need to protect their children and provide alternative sources of information and inspiration to them, right? So, and it's very tempting. I know I've been guilty of this by blaming everybody out there who's not on our side, you know, for this terrible situation. But part of the blame falls on people of conscience who have not taken up action, have not done what needs to be done to counter these issues in the public square. So we need to talk a lot more, and we need to teach a lot more, and raise up people that will have the courage and integrity to fight back, and then influence their peer group. Because they're not going to get it in school, they're not going to get it in movies or television or radio, or on the internet or in their Facebook or wherever. It needs to start at home. And get them to a place of worship that talks about this from the pulpit, that really talks about how absolutely important it is and vital for a healthy human being to understand the gift of life and how we need to fight to protect it.
Our time is up. It's been a full 2 hours. I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank again our panel for your work. Where do we go from here? A number of things are ongoing. David mentioned the letter from members of Congress and Senate seeking full disclosure of what's happened. So number one, disclose. They need to disclose what's been going on. And we need pressure put on from Congress, from our state legislators. If you have not reached out to your representative, I noticed that on the letter to the administration, to the Department of Justice, and to HHS, both Representative Kelly and Representative Rushenthaler here from Western Pennsylvania signed that letter. Unfortunately, Representative Lamb and Representative Doyle have not, so if you are represented by those individuals, I would encourage you to have them ask some tough questions. Investigate. Once we get more documents, we want full investigations done. Whether it's the U.S. Attorney here in Pittsburgh, the Allegheny County District Attorney, the Pennsylvania Attorney General, the Auditor General, appropriate committees of the state legislature. There needs to be a full investigation. And we need new laws. We need new laws. We need prohibitions on funding of institutions that would be engaged in this, because not a single dime of either federal money or Pennsylvania taxpayer money should be going to any institution that is promoting the destruction of life. Those are some of the ideas we need to be working on. There are the groups that sponsored this organization, or this panel today. People Concerned for the Unborn Child, the Pennsylvania Family Institute, Rehumanize International, the Pennsylvania Pro-Life Coalition, the McGee Project, and certainly the Center for Medical Progress are all worthy of your support. You should be following them on social media to find out more ways that we can be helping. We are also going to have some baskets out front, free will offering if folks would like to help support the underwriting of this panel today, the cost associated with this. And we, again, want to thank the pastor for hosting us here at Trinity. God bless you. I'm sorry?
Tell to whom to make checks payable.
Oh, Pennsylvania Pro-Life Coalition is aggregating the contributions. So if you do have a checkbook but not cash and wanted to help out Pennsylvania Pro-Life Coalition, it is who to make that out to. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
2 hour live stream. Yep.